Sure.
Okay, Tracy, I think you can get started. You're
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chelsea Lesner Buxton. Thank you so much for coming to our Service Animal and Emotional Support Animal webinar. So we are the Rapid Response Committee. We are a collective of consumers and staff of the Independent Living Resource Center that gathers twice a month to do activities and education around disabilities. We've had webinars in the past on accessible housing. Let's see, what else? Disability culture and entrepreneurship. We've done some PSAs. And so I just want to welcome everyone here today. Also, we will be monitoring the chat. So if you want to say anything, I will give time for questions at the end of each person's spiel. So please just feel free to put anything in the chat. And first up, I will welcome Jennifer.
Thank you so much. My name is Jennifer Chasman Brown. I am a person with a disability, Caucasian with wire rimmed glasses and a blurred background and a purple shirt. I'm going to talk a bit about service animals. I have had 2 service dogs. I have a second one right now. And so I'm familiar with the work that service dogs do, especially for people with mobility challenges. My dog steadies me when I walk if I need it, especially up and down hills and stairs, and picks a lot of things up for me. He can pick up the smallest thing like a dime, my phone, anything that I might drop. He helps me that way. So with respect to service animals, there are actually 2 animals that are considered service animals, dogs and miniature horses. Both are covered under the ADA as service animals and are trained to do specific tasks for people with disabilities. Guide dogs or guide animals support people with sight and hearing disabilities by providing them with the ability to move around in spaces. They're trained to help people who can't hear, can't see, to be able to move around freely and comfortably. Mobility assistance dogs, like the one that I have, helps a person who has ambulatory or mobility issues by navigating for them, by helping them pick things up, things like that. There are alert dogs as well. Those dogs can help people who have seizure disorders, diabetes, and allergies. They can actually sense when someone's going to be having a seizure and make sure that they notify them and indicate that so that the person can get into a safe position. For diabetic service dogs or alert dogs, those dogs can tell somebody when their blood sugar is too high or too low and indicate to them that they need to test and that they need to then have insulin or food, whatever it might be that they need. Psychiatric service dogs are trained specifically for people with psychiatric disorders and disabilities and PTSD. And so those dogs are trained to do specific tasks that the individuals need. And the same thing is true for autism support dogs. The key here is to recognize that service dogs are not pets. While they live in the home, while they are members of the family, they have jobs and they're working dogs. Next slide, please. So in terms of how to obtain a service dog, the only thing that a person with a disability needs to have in order to obtain a service dog is a verification of need. So usually that's something from a physician that says, or a psychiatrist that says that a service dog would be beneficial for that individual. And then there are several different ways that a person can find a dog. There are several organizations that train and provide service dogs for people who need them. Retrieving Freedom works a lot with PTSD service dogs. It's a group that supports veterans. Needs is an organization that provides service dogs specifically for children's. Canine support teams and Canine Companions for Independence are organizations that find dogs that do a lot of the training of the dog and then also the training of the handler and provide the dogs for people who need them. You can also hire any independent trainer or handler. For the dogs that I've had, I worked with a trainer who did in-kennel training. That means they take the dog for a few weeks at a time and teach the dog the things that they need to know. And then they teach me how to work with the dog. And then the dog continues to build on the skills that they have. So they go back into the in-kennel training for 1 to 3 weeks, about every year for the first 3 years of the dog's life. In terms of certification, for service dogs, service animals, there is not any certification required. You do not have to get your dog certified in any way. As long as the dog is providing you with the support that you need, that dog can be identified as a service dog. There are, however, a couple places that do certifications. One of the best ones that I know of is called the Canine Good Citizen Test. That's an assessment that is not specific for service dogs, although it's part of what service dogs learn to do, but it assesses the dog's ability to be comfortable in public and helps you understand what you need to do to have the dog be able to be in lots of different spaces safely and comfortably. But again, I think I would take from this, like, certification is not required. So sometimes people are told when they get a service dog that they have to go through a certification process and that can be expensive. It is not required. It can be something that a person chooses to do, but again, it's not something that's required by the law or ADA. Next slide. The other thing I want to mention is that, like, in terms of the definition of a service dog is a dog trained to perform disability-specific tasks for a person who needs it, a person with a physical or psychiatric disability. And so the dog really should be trained specific to the individual to meet the needs that they have. There are things that lots of other service dogs do that I don't have my service dog do because I don't need it. He does know how to do things like turn the lights on and off and shut the door. Sometimes it's nice that I don't have to get up and he can go and shut the front door, shut the door of the bedroom. But the dogs are trained based on the need of the individual. So to be considered a service animal, the dog must be trained to perform a job or a task specific to the handler's disability. In California, service dogs in training are covered under the ADA. They're not in the whole US, but some states have grandfathered them in under their state laws that support service dogs. So in California, a person with a disability can bring any of their service dog in training, or a fully trained dog into any space. Next slide, please. So with respect to identification requirements, there aren't any in California. Dogs do not necessarily need to be identified as a service dog. If you go into a space where the individual running that space, a restaurant, a store, an office, they might ask you, and especially if your dog is not identified, you need to say this is a service dog. Many service dog owners do put a vest on their dog, or an ID card on their dog, or some sort of tags. I've seen some people who have leashes that say this is a service dog, just something to identify them. I think that does cut down on the kinds of questions and challenges that a person might have. But I think it's important to know that under California rules, you do not have to have an identification card or a vest on your service dog. It's helpful, but not mandatory. In terms of disability verification, so when you walk into a space with a service animal or a service dog, there are 2 questions that people are allowed to ask you to verify that your dog is in fact allowed to be there under the ADA. The first is the animal a service dog required for a disability? Again, if it's a horse or mini horse, they can ask that. Just, is the animal a service animal required for a disability? The other question that they can ask is, what work or task has the service dog been trained to perform? So if the person answers yes to the first question, and then gives some examples of what the dog or the animal does for them, they can't be denied entry or access. And I think it's also critical to know no other questions are required for a person to answer. They don't need to show what the dog can do. They don't need to produce any documentation. Answering those 2 questions is all that is needed and all that can be asked of a person with a service animal. Thank you. Okay, in terms of service dog registration in California, the state doesn't require registration of service dogs. There may be registration requirements that apply to all dogs that reside in your area, but they're not service dog specific. So like, I have a dog in this county, I registered the dog with the county. I would do that whether the dog is a service dog or not. If the dog is a service dog, there should be no charge for registering it in the county. And again, while you don't have to register a service dog, same way that you don't have to identify it, registration can be a valuable thing to do. It allows your dog to be easily found or located if there's any problem. It allows people to understand that you have a dog and that you have a service dog in your home. Next slide, please. Yes, so there are a couple different laws that support access for those with service dogs. Title II and Title III of the ADA require access for those with service dogs. That means that anywhere that I'm allowed to go, anywhere that the handler is allowed to go, the dog is protected and allowed to go there as well. So restaurants can't refuse me service with my dog, libraries, post office, shops, government buildings, educational institutions, all of those places that I'm allowed to go freely, my dog is allowed to go with me. The only time that you could deny an animal access, a service dog access, if somehow it poses a threat to health or safety, and the person who's denying the access would have to prove that the dog was somehow a threat. Couple common reasons why service dogs and their handlers get turned away from institutions. The first is a lack of understanding of the law. I actually have in my dog's vest little cards that describe the requirements under the ADA, allowing my dog to be in the places that I'm in. So if somebody says to me, your dog is not allowed here, it's easy for me to pull that out and to say to them, like, this is a service dog, here's the law that governs access with a service dog, and I can help those people understand the laws better. The other reason is sometimes that there's poor behavior from the dog, or the dog is a disruption somehow. And again, that would have to be something that the person refusing access would be able to prove that the dog was somehow a safety threat or a cause for disruption. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of etiquette with service dogs, the first thing is don't judge, right? The person who has that dog for a myriad of reasons, and that dog is helpful to them, allows them to live more inclusively, allows them to do things they might not otherwise be able to do, allows them access to places. I couldn't go hiking without my dog, but I do a lot of hiking and a lot of walking because I can rely on him. If there's an uneven surface or steep ground, he helps me do that. So don't judge the person who's got the dog in any way. That person is a person who is using the dog as a tool for access and inclusion. When you approach a dog, approach the handler, not the dog. Often the dogs are very cute and people want to pet them and touch them. And that's not always something that you can't do, but you need to approach the person who's got the dog, not the dog. So don't start with your hand out to the dog. If you recognize it's a service dog, approach the handler, speak to the person. So again, this is similar. Don't touch or speak to a service dog without asking permission from the handler. I often let people say hello to my dog, but it can't be when he's in the middle of doing a task for me because I might be relying on him even for my physical safety. So ask permission from the handler, speak to the person with the dog. If you want to touch the dog or say hello to the dog, ask first before you even reach out a hand. If you have a dog and you see a service dog, it's best to steer your dog away from that dog. Again, sometimes it's not fully obvious that that service dog is doing a service, but it is. And so it's really helpful if other dogs are not distracting to the service dog. The service dog also, my dog is incredibly food motivated. So please don't offer food to a service dog. That's a way to distract him from the task that I'm asking him to do. Often when I'm in a physical space for a long time, my service dog gets comfortable, lays down, stretches out. He's still on the job. He's still doing a task for me. He's ready to do anything I ask him to do at a moment's notice. So him sleeping is something that when he's on the job for an 8-hour day, it's important that he does get a little bit of time to rest. So if I'm sitting, I'm not moving, I don't need anything in particular in that moment, he's still on the job. I also think a lot about like the diabetic service dog or the service dog that someone with epilepsy might have. Even though that dog is just laying there, they're ready to sense what they might need to sense in order to support their handler. So they are still on the job. And then the last piece of etiquette that I want to encourage you to think about is the fact that an unattended service dog might be a sign that the handler needs help. If you see a service dog kind of in a space by itself, maybe looking around or seeming anxious, that dog may have a person who's in need of help and be trying to figure out how to get help. So like my dog would take you back to where I am if I fell or something and I needed help up. He would go and find someone and he would bring them back to me. Same thing might be true of a service dog for someone with epilepsy or someone with diabetes who maybe is in a compromised physical condition and needs help. So recognize that that service dog might, like if you say to them, what's going on? Take me to your owner. Is everything okay? Where do you want me to go? Let's go. Show me. The dog will take you back to the person whose dog it is. So those are just things to think about as you consider your interactions with service dogs. I hope that all was good information and helpful information. We're going to pause for questions for a moment, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. Is there any questions right off the bat? And there will be time later on at the very end for questions too, if you don't have anything right now.
I have a question. When you talk about registering a service animal, what agency is that registered with? Because that's not the county license, that's a separate registration for that database that you mentioned.
Yeah, thank you for that question. There are a couple different places. So you can do the assessment like with Canine Companions for Independence, Or there is an organization, I can find that link, I'll share it in the chat, that does oversee training of service dogs, and they do a certification assessment. But again, because there's not any certification that's like nationally required, there also isn't only one that you're allowed to get. It would just be picking a reputable organization and having them assess your dog to make sure that the dog is trained to do the tasks that you need to do. So it would just be like one of several organizations that you could have do that assessment and then provide you with a certification. The hard thing about that is some of them are legitimate and some of them are places that are just trying to get money for people.
Yeah.
Is
I
somebody
just
reading
wanted
the
to make,
chat? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make a comment. Canine Companions for Independence only raises and trains their own dogs. So they provide nothing for anybody else's dog.
Right, but they raise and train dogs that they're then providing for people who need them.
Correct. But they don't do any certification for other organizations' dogs.
Right.
All right.
There's
Are
a
there
question
any?
in chat. There's a question
Did I
in
say
chat.
Canine Companions for Independence? The organization that I meant is the Canine Good Citizen Organization. That's the one that does the assessment of dogs in public spaces. Canine Good Citizen test. And Canine Good Citizen is a broad organization that does assess dogs across the country.
There's a question in chat from Laura Armanino. By asking what the dog is trained to perform, does that violate any privacy for medical conditions for the handler?
The question that can be asked is that a service dog? And then what work or task has it been trained to perform? So you can simply say, like, you don't have to disclose a lot of information. I would say it provides me with support for my mobility issues, or it can pick things up for me and steady me. So the handler is allowed to decide how to answer that question. If you feel comfortable saying, I'm diabetic and the dog can sense that, that's an acceptable answer. If you don't want to disclose that information, you can say, I have a medical condition and the dog helps me navigate the world with that medical condition, or the dog keeps me safe because of my medical condition.
Are there any more questions before we move on? All right. Well,
Can I just, Jacob, can you switch out the slideshow that you have up there with the one that I just gave you in the chat? Please.
Oh, see.
Thank you.
So we will get.
all right. Well, while we wait for that, I will introduce our next section, which is emotional support animals, and that'll be with Joni and I. So Joni, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joyful Joni Gold, and I'm so happy you're all here with us. We're going to be talking about emotional support animals. I'm sitting in my living room with an astrological pink or purple, light purple and black tapestry behind me about cycle of the ages. And I've got long gray hair. And I thought we would start with a moment of levity. This is a comic. And it takes place in a park, and there's a large dog with his person who's a woman, and there's a smaller dog and his person who's a man. And the large dog says to the small one, while we're out here chasing the ball, What's stopping them from jumping in the car and driving off? And the caption says, problems that plague emotionally unsupportive animals. I just thought we'd have a little bit of lightness here in the middle of our presentation. Okay, so emotional support animals, commonly called ESAs, because that's a mouthful, are different than service animals in a number of ways. One of them, the scope is larger, in another area, the scope is smaller. Service animals, as you heard, are only dogs and miniature horses. With ESAs, they can be any breed of animal. You could have a hedgehog or a rabbit, obviously cats and dogs, but it's not limited. You can have a snake, you can have a fish. And this has caused problems, especially in the airlines, because some people perhaps took advantage and brought some really unusual animals on board, claiming they were ESAs, which causes problems for those of us who have legitimate ESAs. But I've learned, and it's good for everybody not to judge. I have a friend who had a 6-foot long snake, and the snake would lovingly wrap around her neck like a scarf. And she derived a lot of comfort and love from the snake. So it's not for us to judge. In the area of functions, this is where service animals, it's quite broad. As you heard Jen say, there's all sorts of disabilities. With emotional support animals, however, it's much narrower. It's only for emotional disabilities. And on the slide, you can see the qualifying disabilities: anxiety, depression, PTSD, ADHD, ADD, chronic stress, autism spectrum, and certain phobias. So they are different than service dogs in that there is no training. There are no specific tasks or jobs that they perform. They just provide emotional support and comfort. And they're therefore different than the psychiatric service dogs that Jen mentioned, because those are trained to do a specific task or job. So even though it's an emotional disability, they have training versus no training. And now we'll hear from Chelsea about how to obtain an
Hi
ES.
again, hi again, my name is Chelsea, pronoun she, they. So like Joni said, ESAs can be really any animal that you want that brings you comfort. So just like if you were gonna go find a pet, you can find an ESA really anywhere that you would find a regular pet. The difference is that an ESA provides you emotional support for the qualifying disabilities that Joni had mentioned earlier. Now, many landlords don't want animals, and therefore, even though ESAs are protected under the Fair Housing Act, landlords tend to come up with another excuse as to why they can't rent to you, because they don't want animals in the unit. And so again, because legally they can't discriminate, they will come up with another way to not rent to you. Or if you already live in a place and want to get an ESA, you do have to request a reasonable accommodation, and that requires, well, the landlord can request a medical letter stating the need for an emotional support animal, and that can be either from a mental health professional or other medical provider, and that is in the legal right of the landlord to request that letter.
So I had an interesting experience. I had been living in my unit for many years and had an emotional support cat. And at the time I first moved in, there were no animals of any type in the complex. And I explained and shared copies of the law. And so she was accepted. And since then, many cats have been allowed, whether they're ESAs or not. And then a few years back, I decided I wanted to have a dog as well. So I knew it was my legal right to have an ESA. So I just went and I rescued one and brought Lucky Love home. And then the complaint letters started coming from the landlord and about all sorts of things, noise and coming too close to windows and so forth. And they said, we never gave you permission. So I ended up having to get a lawyer to help me, and they wrote a letter basically saying, you have no choice, landlord, you have to allow this as a reasonable accommodation. But they did advise me, you need to request it. Even though it's your right, you need to request it. And it doesn't have to be, lengthy, but putting something in writing and formally requesting is what is needed.
Yeah, and so Joni and I both wanted to share our ESA letters, and so I'll go first. My ESA letter is from a mental health professional. So it says, to whom it may concern, Chelsea Lesner Buxton. Oops, 1 second. Chelsea Lesner Buxton is my client and has been under my care since November 2019. I am intimately aware of her medical history and functional restrictions brought on by her mental condition. As a result of her condition, she meets the definition of disabled under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Fair Housing Act. Due to her mental condition, Chelsea has certain limitations related to depression and anxiety. In order to assist in alleviating these difficulties and to improve her ability to lead a better life while fully enjoying and using the dwelling unit you own or manage, I advise that Chelsea have her emotional support animal with her at all times. I am very much aware of the extensive professional literature related to the therapeutic benefits of emotional support animals for individuals with mental disabilities, such as that faced by Chelsea. Upon request, I can share quotations to relevant studies that would be more than willing to answer any questions that you may have regarding my recommendation that Chelsea Lesner Buxton have her emotional support animal with her at all times. Should you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me.
And my letter says, Dear X, Joni Gold has been my patient since May 14th, 2020. I have been treating her for 2 mental illnesses, which are among the 5 permanent disability Social Security Administration awarded her since March 2001. They each meet the criteria for having emotional support animals. During this time, she was advised to acquire an emotional support animal or 2, which she has had since she became disabled. This has been a vital component of her emotional health, along with psychotherapy and medication. Dogs and cats require different levels and types of care, so they call on different levels of effort and commitment on Joni's part. They also provide different types of support and comfort, with a dog being more loyal, attentive, loving, and friendly, while cats are loving yet more independent and need less care. Dogs require exercise, and a senior dog requires frequent potty breaks, so that necessitates Joni to be less sedentary, which is good for her physical and therefore mental health. Moreover, the particular dog Joni adopted, being a senior and blind, mirrors some of the challenges Joni has had and continues to face. He was severely neglected by his previous owner. This fact touches Joni's emotions and personal history, and therefore helps with her emotional healing. Because all of these reasons, he provides focus to her life, motivation to recover, and improvement of emotional and physical functioning as much as possible. It is for these reasons I prescribe she get a dog in addition to her cat. Both animals help provide stability as well as a reason to live. Therefore, Ms. Gold has legitimate reasons to have 2 ESAs. Ms. Gold's emotional health is as important as her physical health. It is intertwined with her physical health. They affect one another. Joni has demonstrated that she deeply loves Lucky Love and that she is deeply committed to him. I want to see this bond continue and flourish as it is already beneficial to her. I hope this clarifies the need for Joni to have both cat and dog as her emotional support animals. I also request that you conclude this situation as quickly as possible for the sake of Joni's mental health. Should you need any additional information, please feel free to contact me. So after hearing these 2 letters, hopefully you have heard some commonalities as well as some differences. One of the commonalities is that we had professional relationships with our mental health provider. It was stated when we began service with them. They explained in both letters the reason, the need, what the animal provides for us. The difference, two differences. One that is that in Chelsea's letter, they stated what the disabilities were. In mine, they did not. You do not need to state what the disabilities are, just that they fall within the criteria. And the other difference, of course, is that mine was a justification for 2 separate species, and Chelsea's was for her dog alone. So the landlord, just to recap on this, the landlord is within their rights to require a letter, and it can be from a mental health or just a medical provider in order to live in a particular dwelling. Okay, now with the slide that's been up and taking your attention all this time,
So
we
we-
have policies that cover emotional support animals. The Fair Employment and Housing Act is the main one. It's a federal act. And like service dogs, no ID tags or documents in your home are required. And like service dogs, there are vests. Recently saw somebody with one and they had the vest and the leash, big bold letters that said emotional support animal, but you're not required. I personally put a tag, one of the multiple tags on her collar. Also, no additional information is needed. That ESA letter is it. They must respect it. And they cannot charge any fees or deposits. Like a service animal, ESAs are not pets. So any pet rules, even in a complex like mine that's had a no pet policy, they do not apply. They cannot even charge you more rent. They can, however, charge you for damages that your ESA causes. The second legislation is the Unrest Civil Rights Act, and that's a California act. And that basically says that you cannot deny access to a tenant with an ESA. And just like with service dogs or horses, you do not need to register or certify them. And there are a lot of websites that will claim, that you have to do this and of course pay a bunch of money. And rest assured, you do not need that. Okay, next slide, please. So next slide, please. There are 6 reasons that a landlord can reject an ESA. The first is if you have an illegitimate ESA letter. So I already went over some of the characteristics, the criteria that need to be in your letter. If you go onto the internet and get a boilerplate or a template of a letter for an ESA, and you go up to some random doctor and say, will you sign this? And then the person or agency that you're giving it to follows up because they have a right to verify that this is a legitimate letter, and they find out you have no relationship, no therapeutic relationship, then that's considered illegitimate. And it would also cast a poor light on those of us who have legitimate letters. So please, if you or anybody that you might know who's considering doing this, please tell them not to. A second reason is if there are health reasons. And for example, if you're sharing a dwelling and the other person or people are allergic to cats, if you want a cat or a dog or whatever the animal, and they're allergic, then that's a valid reason to say, no, you can't have that animal. The third would be is if the ESA poses a threat. And although they didn't elaborate, this would be something like, you know, if they bite repeatedly. Hopefully after the first time you're getting some training for your animal not to bite. The fourth is trespassing. Say you have a fence between your unit and the person next door, and you have a cat, and the cat's constantly not only climbing the fence but jumping over into their yard. That would be considered trespassing, so that's a no-no. The fifth is if your animal does cause damage or a financial strain for the landlord. Hopefully they would just say, please pay for the repairs. But if it's something that's ongoing, then they would have a valid reason to say no. And the sixth is size. So Jen talked about miniature horses. Miniature horses can be wonderful, but they're not appropriate for an apartment. If you live on a farm, great, you know, have your horse. I would think the same with like a mastiff, you know, a huge dog, you know, in a small apartment, that's just not a good fit. So, you know, when you're choosing one, you know, make sure it's going to do well because you want your animal to be thriving. And if they're confined in too small a space, it's not healthy for them. Me personally, I've always had small dogs under 15 pounds. And it's not only that I can pick them up, but also that they're in an appropriate sized place. So now we'll hear from Chelsea about etiquette.
Yeah, so this is Chelsea again. So for ESAs, this is kind of just very broad for really any animal that you see out and about, because not necessarily are they gonna be have a vest or a leash that broadcasts that they're an emotional support animal. So this is just kind of if you see really kind of general if you see an animal out with their owner. And that was just to first to ask if you can pet the animal. And before going up to the animal and saying, trying to pet it. I know, my dog's super friendly and very non-aggressive. He's very kind, but he's also really shy towards new people. And so he does not like it when people that he doesn't know just comes right up to him and tries to get in his bubble and not, trying to get him to come to them. And so it's kind of like people, we want to respect their space and their bubbles, and they have feelings and thoughts, and they might not want to be pet or interacted with. And so, and then just for etiquette for owners of ESAs is that legally ESAs are not entitled to go in all of the same places that a service dog can, or well, service animal can go in. However, there are exceptions, and you may even need to ask permission before you go take your ESA into an establishment such as like a medical office, or just any other place in the community. And so with that, I want to see if there's any questions.
Oh, Chelsea, we have some good questions here in chat.
Okay.
The first one is from Brenda Gonzalez. She says, besides a therapist or doctor, is there any other specialist that would be able to attest of such need?
So I've just poked around a little bit to find answers to the questions in the chat. If you want to take them, great. If you want me to, I'm happy to as well.
Yeah, would you mind answering that one? I believe a psychiatrist can also do it, but yeah, Jen, if you have any other.
Yeah, so in California, it has to be a licensed professional. So that means like a therapist or a physician. But there was some like gray area there a little bit. For example, your OBGYN or your dermatologist could write a letter for you if they have specific knowledge of the condition for which you require the emotional service animal. Does that make sense? As long as the person's licensed, they can be any licensed medical or mental health professional, as long as they can attest to your need for the ESA.
And that's the main thing. They have to be able to know you enough to be able to state how this animal will help you. So I suppose it could, like Jen said, a dermatologist, if they had that kind of relationship with you and had that knowledge about you and what function the animal serves in your life, then yeah, they're licensed, they can do it. The second question, this is a really good question. How many ESAs are allowed per person? Thank you, Abby, for that. As far as I know, there's no limit. I would think similarly to my case, that if you had more than two, you would have to explain why you need the additional animals. Okay, and obviously it would have to make sense, right? Not some kind of fluffy, or ludicrous or whatever, off the wall explanation. Oh, the more the merrier, they fill up my bed. I mean, there has to be some valid reason, but if they can justify it, I don't think there's a limit by law of how many.
No, I was helping a woman with 7 service animals, and I checked, and yes, it's okay, and would it, but I'm not sure about ESAs, but I know for service animals it's your needs. You can justify them, you can have as many as you need.
Do you want me to repeat that, Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jacob said that he was once working with a woman who had 7 service dogs, and so he's not sure about ESAs, but for service dogs, as long as you can justify the reasoning as to why you need that many, that you can have as many as you need.
Yeah, and I think that holds true for ESAs as well. The difference, I think, is you need an ESA letter for each animal,
Yeah.
right? You can have as many as you need, as long as there's been verification of that need for each animal that you do have.
Okay, moving on. Tracy has 2 questions. We'll take one at a time. Can housing or access be denied if there is a ban on specific dog breeds? I don't believe so. Again, it's not a pet rule. Pet rules do not apply. So typically I think that would be a pet rule that would say, no, you can't have pit bulls or whatever, type of breed. That's the typical one that are ones that are not allowed. So again, pet rules don't apply because an ESA or a service animal is not a pet. The second question that Tracy Collins has is, if an ESA is for a minor child, can a parent be denied access if child is not present? Well, I'm not sure why the parent would be there with the animal and not the child if the animal's providing support to the child. Maybe you can explain a little more, Tracy, what kind of situation you're thinking of.
Hi, sorry. So basically, like perhaps if the child is, in school, or say the child is has another parent at another household, and that child is at the other parent's house without the emotional support animal, I guess you can say. So the emotional support animal does not go with the child to the other parent's household. Can that parent whose household that emotional support animal is in, go take that emotional support animal to places with them if they have to,
child
like
or
if
without the
they
child?
can't leave that animal alone or
I think that would, I think it would kind of be the same situation, that, because ESAs aren't legally allowed everywhere, like a service animal. I think it'd be similar. I am not sure about, because they wouldn't be with the child. I don't know.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, because
But
to
I
me,
mean,
it's
but
like
that parent is kind
sometimes
of
I
the
have to leave
legal
Sage.
response, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you
But that parent, is the one who, pretty much cares for that dog and, is the, legal responsible person for that animal. And sometimes the child just isn't always with them,
Yeah.
Okay,
the
so
dog
think of it
doesn't go
this
to
way.
school with the child. And so sometimes that parent may take that dog, places. Can they be denied access?
Yeah, well, think of it
Because
this
the
way.
animals,
If that dog was not an ESA and that parent had a non-ESA dog, would there be an expectation to take that dog everywhere? No,
yeah,
I mean, and the
right?
same
They're just
thing,
not allowed everywhere as an ESA or not. They're just not allowed. So whether the child is there or not, because there's no legal right to take that dog or
everywhere.
animal ESA into a place, that parent needs to make sure that it's okay for that animal to be left home alone,
Okay.
and not constantly taken places. I have to do that. I call doctors, is it okay for me to bring Sage? And or I'll ask them sometimes, on a previous visit, for the next visit, is it okay if I bring her? And of course, you can't leave an animal in a car when it's over 70 degrees for even 5 minutes. So, she's going to have to get used to being home alone once it starts heating up. And that's just what you have to deal with having responsibility for an animal, is making sure they are okay alone, because no, you can't take them with you everywhere.
can I add to that too, Joni?
Yes.
So I think the way to think about it maybe is that, like, this is true for a service animal as well, a service dog as well. It's not transferable, right? The service dog is a service dog for me. Like once or twice my husband has been like, oh, I'm gonna go in the store and just take the dog. Technically, if he were asked, he'd have to acknowledge that the service dog is not a service dog for him. And
Yeah.
that it shouldn't be there, like in that space where other dogs are not allowed. It shouldn't be there. Like, because the person who it's serving is not also physically there, right? So like you can't sort of transfer it, except for maybe the question that's later on about if an ESA is provided for one child, can it be provided to a different child at a later time? I think the answer to that is if that second child has an ESA letter and need, sure, right? I could have my service dog. If my husband did have a need for a service dog, that service dog could be a service dog for both of us.
Okay.
If Joni had somebody else that she was living with or that she was partnered with, and like that person also needed a service animal, they could get a letter attesting to that need, and that service animal could be for more than one person or transferred from one person to another. But for the first question, I would just think about it as like, generally, it's not transferable. You can't sort of take a service dog and call it a service dog if you're not the person for whom it's
Yeah.
the service.
Okay.
And Tracy asked the question, let me rephrase that. Can one ESA be provided to more than one individual? So I don't think there's any limit. If I were cohabiting with somebody and Sage was able to provide comfort to that person who was also had an emotional disability, and they have a valid ESA letter, there's no reason that she can't provide that comfort, that emotional support to both of us. So it's very different than a service animal who's trained to do specific tasks for that one handler. So there's more latitude, I think, with ESA because it's not trained and it's support and so she can give love to a lot of people, right? I mean, there's no limit, and she does, so there's no limit like that. Let's move on to Laura has another question. Thank you for putting all these wonderful questions in chat. If you are asked about your animal and say it is an ESA, can a public place deny you entry since it is not a service animal? Most definitely. As we said, there is no legal right to have an ESA in a public place. So I don't take Sage into the grocery store. My neighbor who works at the local grocery store took her on a walk one day and asked me if it was okay and took her to the store. And possibly because she works there, no one asked her, is that an ESA? Is that a service dog? No one said anything. However, if I were to go in there and somebody might ask me, and if I said she's an ESA, because I would not lie and say she's a service dog, I would say she's an ESA, they could well turn me away at the door. And then if it's over 70 degrees, I have to go home and take her, put it, deposit her at home and then go back to the store. So it's good to check it out ahead of time, just to make sure there won't be a problem like that. And then maybe you're running out of time or you don't have enough gas or whatever, to go back and forth. So it's a lot less disruptive, I think, if you can find out ahead of time and get that permission. So we have another question from Abby from Capslow. Does excessive noise, i.e. from abandonment, fall under one of the 6 reasons a landlord can deny an ESA? Can they do anything after move-in to mitigate the problem and help the animal? Unfortunately, this happened in my neighborhood, but the dog is doing amazing now, doing to doggy daycare and training. Well, those were very specific 6 reasons, and nowhere in there did it say noise or disturbance. Now there are like local ordinances about disturbances, so they may be able to pursue that depending on what the local laws say about an animal creating a disturbance. That was my landlord when I first got Lucky Love. Said, she's barking and barking and barking. And then in the second letter of complaint, this is why I got an attorney. Oh, she barked between 11 and 1 and then began between 5 and 6. And I was like, there's no way that was my dog. She sleeps next to me. I'm a light sleeper. I don't take medications that knock me out. And if she woke up, I would have awakened, and she's never barked, after like 10 o'clock at night. And so I knew, and I was being very generous. I said, maybe they dreamt it, or they were hearing, the TV was on, or it was some other neighborhood dog, but it was not my dog. So they can definitely complain, but I don't think the landlord has any recourse other than if it breaks a local ordinance and not pertaining to being an ESA, but just nuisance disturbance in general. But no, that's not a valid reason under FEHA to do that. Okay, we have another question from Mavis Wong. Hi, I'm with Home Share Slow. Oh, hi. What are some of the rules, exemptions for homeowners who rents out extra rooms in their homes? Jen, do you want to address that, Jen?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there are any. So under fair housing, even when you're renting out a room in your home, you're not allowed to discriminate against the person to whom you'd be renting. The things that Joni did mention earlier hold true. If there's somebody in the house already who has allergies, right? Or if there's cats in the house and you're bringing in a dog that's not cat friendly. Like there are things that could allow the person to not rent to a person with an emotional support animal or a service animal, but they would have to be under those 6 sort of restrictions that Joni shared before, or somehow be like a nuisance, a threat, a danger to safety, health and safety of the people in the unit. But fair housing still applies to homeowners who rent rooms. So I think that would fall within those guidelines.
All right, and that's a valid, like Jen said, I mean, you don't want animals to be fighting with each other. So if that's a known, if that's a given, then yeah, you're within your right to say that this is not a good mix, and it's not a discrimination, but it's more of a safety issue. I think another question from Vicky Smith. Are service animals and ESAs required to be spayed or neutered if the ESA is a cat or dog? There's no requirement. I mean, that's responsible ownership to spay or neuter your animal, but it's not required by law anywhere that I'm aware of. And Tracy Collins says, can a service animal vest be worn by an ESA? That would not be a good idea because, like Jen explained, the two questions that anybody has a legal right to ask you is it a service dog? And if you lie and say yes, because basically you're lying, putting on a service animal vest, then they have a right to ask you, well, what task? So what are you going to say? A lie? You're going to make something up, and there could be repercussions. And think about it this way, it's not just for you, the repercussion, it's for all the rest of us,
But
who
there
the
are,
people,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
just the people, like the people who have valid service animals. And then people are going to maybe wonder, well, is that a legit service animal? And are you trying to get away with it? And so we don't want to promote that kind of culture. Like I said, with the airlines, there was already that issue, people claiming everything was a service animal or an emotional support animal when it wasn't. So, I mean, anybody can do whatever they want. You can put the service vest on, but should you? Absolutely not. Jen?
I just was going to say that there are ESA vests.
Yeah, I
So
mentioned that earlier.
you can still identify your animal as the emotional support animal. And there are places that will say yes when you say, can my dog come in? My dog's an emotional support animal. Can it come in?
Yeah, it's totally up to the owner or manager of whatever the facility is, whether it's a doctor office or a grocery store or any kind of a business, a mom and pop store. It's totally up to them whether they allow it. But honesty is the best policy all around, like your letter, your ESA letter being a legitimate letter. I mean, and not trying to claim something if it's not true. I mean, this is for people who have valid need. It's not just like randomly saying, oh, this is an ESA because, I want to call it an ESA. You need to have a need, and it needs to be documented in that ESA letter. And then, whether you label it with a vest or a tag or is totally optional, as we've explained, but can reduce some confusion.
Thank you.
Any more questions? This has been a lively conversation. I love it. Going once, going twice.
All
Chelsea,
right.
back to you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, with that, I'll introduce Emily Bridges.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Bridges, Public Health Specialist at the Independent Living Resource Center, and someone who has invisible disabilities or non-apparent disabilities, whatever you prefer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a white woman with shoulder-length, wavy-ish brown hair, wearing glasses, a green striped zippered zippered shirt, a tank top, sitting in front of a blurred background, and I'm here to talk about some advocacy opportunities that we have coming up. So Jacob, whenever the slides are ready, please. Could you go back one more slide?
We
No worries. So we went over a little bit about legislation and overview about what emotional support animals and service animals are. One thing that we like to highlight is a bill called a law called the Assistance Dog Special Allowance, which provides a monthly payment of $50 to eligible persons who use a guide, signal, or service dog to help them with their related disability needs. The allowance is to help pay for the cost of food, grooming, and health care. It's a state allowance, which you could apply for at the following link that's on the slide that we'll also include in the chat. Next slide, please. However, there are a couple of major pitfalls with the ADSA. This doesn't include people who have emotional support animals, like someone who's in Chelsea's situation or Joni's situation that claim to have an emotional support animal. Plus, in today's market, $50 doesn't go very far. It barely covers one bag of food, a trip to the groomer, or most vet bills. And I don't have an emotional support animal or a service dog, but even I would think that when my dog was alive, that would not cover much of anything, would barely scratch the surface of their needs. So this is an advocacy opportunity to advocate and let your voice be heard. And if you have your calendars open or a way to mark this down, at 3 p.m. on May 6th, which is I don't know what the exact date is, but I believe it is a Monday.
Today.
A week from today. A
2
couple
weeks.
2 weeks from today. Thank you, Jacob. ILRC will meet with Senator Hart over Zoom to discuss raising the benefit to $150 a month and expanding the ADSA to emotional support animals. If you'd like to join us, please contact Jacob at his email address listed for more details.
Thank you, and I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with that information. So if you didn't catch it, I'll send it to you.
Well,
I
And
dropped in the chat.
did anyone have any question for Emily?
And Jennifer, thank you for dropping the application link in the chat for us.
are there any last minute questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. It was a pleasure getting to speak to all of you. And like Jacob said, he will send out a follow-up email tomorrow on the advocacy effort. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Also, oh, thank you so much.
Kelsey, you were about to
Thank
say
you.
something.
Yeah, also if you do want to join us, the Rapid Response Committee, we meet every second and fourth Monday of the month. So just shoot Jacob an email. Okay.
Vicky, did you have a question or comment?
I did not know. I was just popping on to say thank you in my voice versus typing in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I work for Cal Poly, and there's not a day that goes by that I'm not answering some sort of service animal / ESA question. of some-
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So thank you. It was just informative, and it was good to know where like I can work on some aspects, of our policies and where we're going strong. So I really appreciate the effort that everybody put into this presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
I'm Vicky's colleague, and I also work for Cal Poly, and just wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation and all of the information.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate to reach out to the ILRC if any questions come up that you guys need support on.
Okay, wonderful. I really appreciate that offer. Alrighty, have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank
you.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Good job, guys.
Thank you all. Sorry for my trouble running slides. Thank you for bearing with me.
I
No
hate it when it
worries.
goes ahead, it's like, oh,
Yes,
like
I
they're
do.
not paying attention to what we're saying. They're reading the slide,
Sorry,
Yes, it's like
I,
it's a little fiddly, but to keep stopping the screen share in between presentations, so people are focusing on each other and the question and answers, and then restart the screen share for the next presenter. That's
yeah,
yeah, it's a
do,
little fiddly, but it's doable.
I'll do better next time. Thank you all for your hard work, and I'll be in touch with the next meeting.
Woo.
Sounds
Awesome.
good.
Oh, Jacob, I'm not sure if I sent this to you because I was out of the office and I'm still feeling like I'm playing catch up. But if I can make it to that May 6th discussion with Senator Hart, I'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.